the notice up in a second.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into this webinar. There's a huge amount to cover because an enormous amount has happened in planning in recent months. What with the sort of revised NPPF just before Christmas and the LURA Levelling Up and Regeneration Act again, kind of last autumn, with some pretty momentous changes in actually. So there's a huge amount for well, for the professional planners to get to grips with and the lawyers, but for community groups, it's pretty daunting. With some huge things from new infrastructure levies to national development management policies, emphasis on brownfields, some complicated stuff around the tilted balance. And don't worry, I'm throwing stuff out here that I can say glibly and pass on to our expert speaker to say more about. But we're very, very lucky and very grateful, actually, Catriona. Thank you for coming along to speak to us today. Catriona's been in planning, she just said, I think 34 years. So seen through quite a lot of reform and changes. And you are out there banging the drum the whole time. I see sort of on social media and in the trade press that you write for about the need for strategic planning, which I agree with. Sort of piecemeal planning doesn't work for all sorts of reasons, and hugely experienced in local policy making and all the way up to sort of national planning as well. So as I say, very grateful. Thank you for coming along today. And in a minute, I will hand over to you, Catriona. But anyone who's listening, we will take questions at the end. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat throughout this talk. And we're going to try and sort of help you through what the changes mean for you, a bit about what the local authorities are doing in respect to those changes and how they're starting to interpret them in these early days, and a bit about how you'll find you're affected as a campaign group. So no further ado, over to you, Catriona. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, it's lovely to be here. And as Rosie said, there's been a lot happening, but it feels as if for about the last 3 or 4 years, we've been in this constant wheel of reform. So I'm going to try and cover an awful lot in a very short period of time. I'm going to try and keep it fairly high level in terms of so that, you know, everybody understands what I'm saying. And as Rosie said, if there's any questions at the end, I will try my very best to answer them. If I can answer them, I will try and get the answer for you through my network. So please don't be disappointed if there's a question I'm not able to answer. So what I'm going to do is share my slides, and I'm going to rattle through these quite quickly. And as I said, keep it quite high level, but there's quite a few to get through. So I'm just going to share my presentation now, which hopefully you will all be able to see in a minute.
Yep, I can see that. Good. Thank you.
Okay, so as Rosie said, I'm a planner. I've worked in local government, I've worked in regional government, I've worked with national government at all different levels. For those that are familiar with the two main roles in planning, one is around spatial planning, plan making, one is around development management. Whilst I've obviously had an awful lot of interaction with development management, I've never worked as within that directly in that field. So there might be some specific questions around that you've got that I will feel a little bit less reluctant to answer, but nonetheless we shall go ahead. So as I said, we've had about 3 years, I think, really planning reform kicked off probably with the August 2020 white paper. So sort of in terms of the government, it was when it was sort of really thrown up in the air, and the view was we needed some whole-scale reform, and it's been sort of appeared in different guises as the years have gone on over the last sort of 3 to 4 years. But last December on the 19th, we had what we now calling Planning Reform Day, when Michael Gove gave his speech and introduced the very long-awaited updated National Planning Policy Framework. And many of you will be very familiar with the version that in 2022, I think it was about 2 days before Christmas, the government published an updated NPPF, as we call it, for consultation, and we've waited a year for that final version. A lot of it was taken forward, some of it wasn't, and I'll cover some of the main changes in a minute. But this was the government's attempt very much to clarify some key parts of national policy, particularly around housing numbers and also around how local authorities should deal with the green belt through local plans. So this is where we are. It's not straightforward. It's not one comprehensive bill covering everything. We've got the recent update to the National Planning Policy Framework, which I just mentioned. And then we've got the new system, which is going to be introduced sort of at the end of this year and throughout 2025. And that is the sort of framework, the basic bones of that were introduced through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act in November. But on top of that, we will also have a full review of the NPPF. And within that, the government is intending to strip out all the sort of development management type policy within and set up their new national development management policy. So this is a very new part of the planning system. And on top of that, we also have what the government are calling their long-term plan for housing. So it's not just about the planning system, it's about where they're putting their funding and where their spatial priorities are. And I will talk a little bit about that as well. So there's quite a lot of things that are coming into that all have to come together in terms of what the new system looks like. And at the moment, the latest is that there will be secondary legislation to implement bits of the Levelling Up Act coming forward over the next few months. A lot of as you'll appreciate, it's a very big act, so a lot of the planning related bits are quite late on, so we might not see much of that until after the summer. And we're expecting at the moment the first sort of main consultation on the new NPPF, so not the one that's just been updated, but the full new NPPF. And at the moment, the civil servants are saying late May. But as we know with government, that may well change. But and we've also got that little issue of a potential general election getting in the way at the moment. But the timescale at the moment is that we will have a first consultation on the vast amount of the NPPF and on the new National Development Management policies in May. The deadline for local plans under the current system is 30th of June 2025. So a lot of local authorities are very busy trying to get their plans submitted for examination before that date. That may well change. That appeared in a consultation last summer. It doesn't appear anywhere else. So that date may well very much change again, especially if there is a new government in place. So the changes to the current system. So if we take this back, this is Reform Day, December 2023, and this is the sort of the updated NPPF. So this is all the current system. There was what I would say is more carrots and more sticks coming forward from this. So the more carrots were around, and again, many of you will be familiar, hopefully, with the 5-year land supply, as Rosie mentioned, the tilted balance, which basically says there should be a presumption in favour of permission if you've not got an up-to-date plan or you've not got enough housing coming forward. And the presumption, as I said, the weight effectively goes into meeting the housing needs. At the moment, that is assessed on a 5-year land supply basis. In future, if you are under the new NPPF, if you've got a plan as a local authority that has reached Regulation 18 stage, which is the sort of the first main consultation, and it's got some specific things in there, then you will only have to demonstrate that you've got a 4-year land supply of housing. So it's made it a little bit more attractive for local authorities to get on with the plan making because there's an incentive there that they might lose less appeals in theory. And then more sticks. So we've seen a raft of ministerial directions, the first of which was Spelthorne local plan last September. I am declaring interest. I am advising Spelthorne, so I was very much involved in all of that. And then hard on the heels of that were Airwash, West Berkshire, and then more recently we've had Moe Valley. And a number of others that the government, that Michael Gove mentioned in December. The Spelthorne, Airwash, West Berkshire and Moe Valley, which I realise I haven't put there, they were all to prevent councils taking a decision to withdraw their plans from examination. So all of these plans are currently at examination at various stages in examination, but the ministerial direction basically stopped them making a decision to withdraw these plans, forcing them to carry on with the examination process. And then the others are plans like St Albans, Basildon, Castle Point. These are plans that are extremely old, so they've not even been updated to the sort of the previous 2004 system, so they're very, very old. So this was the minister basically saying you've got to get on with these plans, and some of them like Castle Point, Basildon and St Albans were all subject to directions for their local plans back in 2017. So not a lot has happened yet, and we're not quite clear what all this means. I know for a fact that Spelthorne basically meet with civil servants every couple of weeks just to tell them what progress is. There's not really been anything else. So there'll be an awful lot of civil servants meeting with local planning authorities for very quick meetings to agree timetables, but not an awful lot more than that in terms of these interventions. So the second point to make about the NPPF update was around the standard methodology, which is the process by which the government sets the housing targets. Now, the easiest way I can explain this for those not familiar is in it's slightly planning jargon, but I think it makes sense. So we have a figure that is what we call a policy off figure. So it's a number that has been based on demographics, or in this case, a methodology which is aimed at trying to increase affordability. And then you apply policies, the other policies like Greenbelt, but flood risk, all these other things, and you might come up with a different answer. Up until recently, there's been a lot of, I guess, confusion about this, and there's been internal inconsistencies within the NPPF as well, because paragraph 11 of the NPPF, which is the one that basically sets out the tilted balance, but it also makes it clear that local authorities should attempt to meet the standard methodology target as in full or as a minimum, unless there are good reasons not to, unless it conflicts unreasonably with other national policies in the NPPF. Now, for those that have been involved in local plans before, the NPPF is very similar. You can't just pick a policy out and apply that policy independently. In a local plan and the NPPF, you have to look at all the policies as a suite. They all have to work together. And this has been what's caused a lot of the sort of confusion. There's been this assumption that you have to meet the target regardless of the impact. And the government has now made it very clear that the standard method is an advisory starting point for establishing the housing requirement in a local plan, and that you have to take into account these wider issues. And that will help some local authorities local authorities generally are quite risk adverse, and they watch what happens in other examinations. And there's been very few that have challenged this and done it, sort of said we can't meet our needs, for example, because we can't release Greenbelt. It's too important to protect our Greenbelt, for example. So now, hopefully, I think this will help some authorities who want to go down that route, and the risks of going down that route might be seen as a little bit less than they were. For those watching local plans, Elmbridge in Surrey had its first examination hearing last week. It is the first one that has reached examination where they have taken a very purist view of paragraph 11. Their view is we can't meet our housing target because we don't. To do so would mean releasing Greenbelt, and we do not believe there are exceptional circumstances to release Greenbelt. Again, the view is that even if it released more housing for affordable housing, the definition that the government uses on affordable housing is not really affordable, and therefore the benefits that they would get from releasing Greenbelt sites, and Elmbridge is right on the edge of London, it's all strategic metropolitan Greenbelt, the benefits of that they would gain from housing would not outweigh the loss of Greenbelt. And again, the benefits in terms of housing need, they are a very traditional commuter area where, if you build more houses, more people will just move out of London. It's not meeting its own needs, is basically what I'm saying. And then third point there is around a much stronger emphasis on brownfield sites and on the larger cities. We already had an urban uplift, what we call an urban uplift, where 20 of the largest towns and cities, including London and Birmingham, and actually some of the smaller cities like Nottingham and Leicester, have to meet their own needs, but also on top of that, 35% increase. This has, I have to say, no rationale, no evidence behind it. It's a good concept in terms of maximising the use of brownfield sites, but applying a very random number on these towns and cities doesn't make them do any better, frankly. And you know, I'll talk about the latest on brownfield sites in a minute, but it's very, very hard for these areas to consume their own smoke, let alone deliver even more. In all my time working in the southeast, London has never consumed its own smoke, and it never will consume its own smoke. So to require even more from it is not going to solve anything. It's very political. And then we have, as part of the Levelling Up Regeneration Act, the government is revoking what we call the duty to cooperate, which is the current, really the only mechanism which helps local authorities, are supposed to help local authorities work collaboratively across boundaries to look at issues around housing needs and other things. That has been revoked under the Levelling Up Act, and it will be replaced by what the government are calling a new alignment test, which is supposed to help local authorities again work together. There's absolutely no detail on what that looks like, and again, you know, from the rumours I've heard, the government may not even implement that under the new NPPF, so there may well not be anything that replaces the duty to cooperate. So what happens when these areas that are expected to consume their own smoke, what happens when they can't? There is a very big unmet need somewhere floating around, and no mechanism to deliver that. And what happens if the local authority apply the other new bits of the NPPF, which is around character and not delivering, you know, for example, high-rise in areas that would be totally out of character with. And you think of places like Leicester, which has a very old city with an awful lot of low density, very ancient buildings. You know, how can it significantly change the whole character of a city, which would be contrary to NPPF, in order to tick the box around the housing number? So there's a whole load of complications with the government's approach to the urban uplift. And then just the final point on the updated NPPF is really around the Greenbelt. Now, this has vexed planning lawyers and planners alike around the fact that, and I will go on to this bit very quickly and then go back to that one because it's very relevant. So when the government published its consultation in December 2022, there was no reference to transitional arrangements. So the assumption, so several councils were allowed to pause their examination until this came out, because the assumption was that the new NPPF would be a material consideration, it would be an issue around soundness, and these local authorities would be able to apply it. When the new NPPF was published, it basically said if you are already at examination or you've reached a certain stage, you can't use what's in the NPPF, the new NPPF. Now, this is important because in terms of what the new NPPF says around Greenbelt, there's one that I have argued, and that certainly Spelthorne and Spelthorne are using that argument. If you look back at all the quotes from the last 3 years from government, it's very clear that it now reflects the intention behind national policy. And so from my view, it's clarification of national policy. And that is really that it's up to an authority to determine its exceptional circumstances, and it has to look at all these other issues around impact on Greenbelt and other things. The one thing that it is new is local authorities currently, or up until December, if they were preparing their local plan, automatically had to carry out a Greenbelt review if they had Greenbelt. Now the new NPPF is saying you don't even have to do that first bit. Unless you think there are exceptional circumstances, you don't even have to go through that process of carrying out a Greenbelt assessment. And one point I'll make on this, and it comes back to the Guildford High Court challenge in 2019, where it was made absolutely clear that when you're determining what the exceptional circumstances are for releasing Greenbelt through a local plan process, only the local planning authority or the decision maker can decide what these exceptional circumstances are. So an inspector can't challenge you if you are in, and let's look at Elmbridge, for example. If Elmbridge is in its examination, and an inspector can't challenge Elmbridge and say, yes, you do have exceptional circumstances. A developer can't say you do have exceptional circumstances. All an inspector can do is ask them to go away and look again. It is only legally up to the local planning authority to weigh up the different issues that come to the decision around exceptional circumstances. It's not up to anyone else to do that. And it may well be meeting needs, housing needs. It may well be meeting affordable housing needs is sufficient. But in other cases, it may not. So that's quite an important point. So I just put there very recently, these are sort of the results of some of the local plans at examination. Small Valley in January agreed to, they're not meeting their needs in full, but they are releasing quite a lot of Greenbelt, and they've been paused throughout last year, their examination till the NPPF was published. They were at the very end of their examination process. They were likely to be found sound, or they've been given indications that they would be able to found sound, and they've now agreed to, despite quite a lot of pressure, I think, from some councillors to take the Greenbelt sites out, they've now agreed to continue with the plan as is, because their view was it will deliver more affordable housing, and they were at risk from speculative applications. Solihull in the West Midlands is playing quite a clever game, I think. So they have set out 3 options to the inspector. Basically wrote early January saying, right, okay, let's get on with this now. The new NPPF doesn't apply. So they've gone back to the inspector and said, right, okay, so, and their plan, the inspector was basically saying they had to release more Greenbelt. They'd already made the case for exceptional circumstances and they had to release more Greenbelt. And they've gone back and said, right, okay, so we've got one option where we do what you want and we release Greenbelt. We've got one option where we continue with our local plan as is and argue our point, and even if the inspector finds it unsound, that's where we're going to go. Or we can withdraw the plan. Now, they're not currently subject to any ministerial intervention, but I'm absolutely sure that if they decide to withdraw the plan, the minister will be throwing a letter their way in the same way that they've done with the others, and telling them they can't withdraw it. So it may be that their option around carrying on with the plan as it is and not releasing more Greenbelt is what they do. Spelthorne have last Thursday agreed to withdraw all their Greenbelt allocations, apart from 2 for gypsies and travellers and travelling show people, because there is no other alternative. And they've also got issues around sites that are subject to significant flood risk, which the Environment Agency has been objecting to anyway. They can't withdraw the plan, so they have to carry on regardless, but they could end up being found unsound if they can't resolve the issues around flood risk anyway, and may not even resume the examination. So at the moment, they are all taking slightly different ways forward. And also, as you will probably be aware, inspectors are individuals. They have a rule book, but they are professionals in their own right. The contract is between the local authority and the inspector, and they are all human beings and may interpret things slightly differently. So Levelling Up Bill, Act, got to get used to calling it an act now. There are quite a lot. There's quite a lot in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, but not a lot of detail. I think it's fair to say most of what we understand the new system will look like will come through a new policy, which is basically the review of the NPPF, when we see that. And I think there's a lot of concern around the National Development Management Policy. So what these are, basically a local plan usually includes 2 parts. It has its spatial strategy and its policies around that, and then it has, well, 3 parts, and then it has site allocations, and then it has what they call traditional sort of development management policies, which are used when applications come in, so used much more to determine applications. And the idea behind the National Development Management policies is that there is too much repetition across all local plans and it's unnecessary. So they want to take these out of individual local plans and apply them nationally, rather than having local plans do it all themselves. So it could be that you have Greenbelt, for example, in the NDMPs and not an individual, the actual development management policy wouldn't be in individual local plans. Local plans, so I think there's some really good things in this, and I'll say this because I co-wrote a document about what good local plans look like and submitted it to government, and there's almost word for word things in the consultation that we've seen around what is being proposed. The first one, and I think this is my sort of experience with local plans pre-2010, was vision-led plans, outcome-focused plans with a lot more engagement in the plan-making process. We lost our way over the last 14 years on that, and the consultation around the new system is saying we're going to return to that. And I think fundamentally that is a good thing if it's done properly, and if local authorities have got the right resources, and a lot of this comes down to resources and skills. But I think fundamentally setting a long-term vision for a local authority area and pinning your local plan around that is the absolute right way to go. There's a lot of checks and balances being introduced. So we've got gateway checks where at the moment we think it's going to be planning inspectors will come in 3 times through the process just to make sure the local plan is doing the right thing. The alignment policy I've mentioned, which will replace the duty to cooperate. We've got environmental outcomes report, which will replace sustainability appraisals, sustainable environmental appraisals, and we will have what's called local plan commissioners. And I'm assuming, again, no detail, these will sort of be brought in at the last when local plans just aren't progressing or there's something fundamentally wrong. The government will send in a local plan commissioner to see what's wrong and to potentially even take control away from the local authority. It can be done at the moment through Secretary of State, but I think this is going to be a sort of more formalised process as that. Whatever the system, we are extremely under-resourced in local authorities, and it's not just about planning capacity, it's about all the other things that go into making good placemaking. So it's your urban designers, your architects, your transport planners, your housing experts, your environment experts, your ecologists, all of the things that go into make good planning, not good plans and good placemaking, and there just isn't enough people to go around. So that's something that has to be sorted, whatever. And I'll just, as Rose said, I'm a passionate strategic planner, and my biggest concern is that whatever happens, we simply won't be able to address some of our greatest challenges, not just around housing, but around climate change, around building a resilient economy, if we don't have a plan across England where the sum of the parts add up. I am a very strong advocate of a national plan of some sort. Labour have sort of tinkered around with the concept over the last year or so, but I think we are still a long way off that. So we need to have something that helps add things up a little bit across spatially, and not just around housing and climate change, but issues around energy supply, transport infrastructure, national transport infrastructure. We've got a very big gap. And I'm assuming these can be circulated, and I'm not going to pick up all of these, but I put these quotes in because this is pretty much, most of these are from the last year, and most of them are around things like having a better approach to freight, having a better approach to energy supply and energy infrastructure, the economy. These are lots of different bodies and reviews basically saying we've got a massive gap here, and unless we'll never be able to level up the country, we'll never be able to deliver the jobs and the homes that we need if we don't actually work in a much more collaborative way across England. And these are a few sort of final contextual issues as well. These are very recent, these are all from the last 2 months. And these are to make the point that there's become a much stronger voice recently around the fact that, up until 2010, you had local plans made housing targets were around what we called housing provision. So there was an assumption that you would never really meet your affordable housing need. There was affordable housing programs for that. So there was need and there was provision, and we blurred that definition over the last 14 years. It's all an easy one for house builders to shout you're not meeting your need, when actual need, in my view, is much more about genuine affordable housing. It's about dealing with homelessness. It's about dealing with housing waiting lists. And these recent reports that have come out are basically saying the standard methodology's assumption is that we do this by building lots more houses, and that brings the house prices down. The government's own review has basically, the Competitions and Market Authority have basically said that doesn't happen. And then we've also got registered providers, the social landlords, basically saying we're just not getting anywhere near the amount of social housing we need because of the government's definition. It's easy for developers to tick a box and say we've done 40% affordable housing. And if you're in a place like Essex or Kent or Surrey, it's 80% of market value. That's not affordable. That is nowhere near affordable. So you tick a box, but you don't actually address the issue. So we've got a real disconnect between genuinely dealing with the housing crisis in the way that it's needed and building more homes. And I think we've ended up with a real confusion around that. And I think it's important in terms of everything that we're trying to do in planning. And I've had rumours today it's going to be a May election. It could still be a October general election, but we do know there's going to be a general election this year, and there's been a lot around Labour talking about bulldozing the green belt. That there's been lots said. I think a lot of it is a little bit of smoke. I have had lots of conversations with the Labour front bench. For me, I'm confident that they are thinking about it properly. I think last May there was a lot of on the back foot, and there was. I think they have now got to get serious because they may well be in government and they can't make mistakes. This is just one quote, basically recognising that if you are going to change the green belt, then you have to look at it strategically, which I would fully endorse. I have significant concerns around grey belt, whatever that means, but we can cover that if anybody's interested. Thank you. I will finish with that thought.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Lots of really, really good stuff in there, and great to see you highlighting all those various reports showing that you don't deal with affordability through an 80% of market value, particularly as you say in Essex, Surrey and Kent, or Sussex and Kent, and B, that we need social housing. So that was good to see. Right, now you've got lots of questions. So Marge, if you're there, have you been looking at some of them from the beginning, or shall I start picking up from the beginning?
I think you and Caroline have both maybe answered a couple, but I can see that Simon's been dominating our question and answers session. He's got quite a few, and I don't know whether you want me to see if Simon. Oh, he's just coming back in. I don't know whether he
Yeah,
went
why don't we
off.
get Simon to say a few of his in person? If you have to, so yeah,
I'll
if you
just
can
do
find him
that.
to unmute him.
He's just come back into the meeting, so I think he maybe got just thrown out. But
While you do that, Catriona, Simon is on our committee. He's a very experienced local campaigner. He's been parish councillor, and I think he's been a district councillor as well. Certainly his wife has been, or is still. So very involved in lots of positive planning for quite some time.
Yeah, so Simon, I've just made you a presenter, so it means you can take your mute off and raise a couple of your issues if you'd like.
There he is.
That was very, very brave of you to allow me access.
we can shut you down on a whim, Simon. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I know you can, really. Catriona,
we have the power.
Catriona, thank you so much for a very, very, very good précis of what's been going on. as some of you would have seen in the chat, I've got an enormous amount of lack of respect for the honourable member for Spelthorne, who, even though he's got a doctorate in economics, doesn't understand the basics of supply and demand. No, building 300,000 houses is not going to shift the prices. But one of the things I was raising was actually broadly, Catriona. One of the things we hear a lot, particularly from Michael Gove, who's an incredibly articulate man, very intelligent man, very verbose man, is how much of the rhetoric that he and in the past Genrick and at the moment Sunak as well are making is actually reality and is going to actually be delivered.
Well, I mean, if there's a general election in May, I would put money on Gove not being there to deliver anything. But I agree. So when I was director of planning at South East Regional Assembly, and my chair of planning was the Conservative leader of Surrey Heath, and Gove, obviously, that's his constituency. And I remember when we were abolished sort of virtually overnight, I remember saying to her, what is Gove like? And she went, out of all the politicians I've ever met, he's one of the cleverest, and he's the one most likely to stab you in the back. Never trust anything he says.
Yeah.
And that
Exactly.
has pretty much, he's one of the most astute politicians I've ever seen. But he's playing politics. None of this is all rhetoric from their perspective. None of this is, all that 35% uplift, the latest we've had on last month around the brownfield sites, and trying to get London with our 95%. This is just it's all just rhetoric in my view, and most of it is unimplementable anyway.
Yeah.
And I don't know who he's speaking to, because it's very technical and not a lot of people understand that, but they also don't understand what he's selling, actually, if I'm honest. So my view is it's pretty much all rhetoric. I know a lot of what Labour have said is there is a bit of rhetoric there, but I'm more aware of what's happening behind the scenes there, and I know that they have reached out to a lot of good people. A lot of good people. So I'm more confident that they are putting some proper thinking behind the rhetoric.
Right. Yeah. That's fascinating. Just building on that slightly. I mean, and Rosie, you and I have talked about this a lot in the past. The solution actually, and I was at a policy exchange debate in London where I took part, and it was very interesting. Social housing came up, and actually it convinced me that social housing is actually the answer, because it rediverts money into where it should be, rather than it just inflating house prices. But taking that to one side, how likely are we going to see local planning authorities to actually challenge the standard calculation? I mean, because it's a very dangerous route to go down in case the inspector throws in major modifications or just outright plan rejection. And I know we went through this in East Hampshire when the South East Plan was folded back in 2010. Suddenly we didn't have a local plan, and therefore we were open to speculative development, which came rolling in, as it is again at the moment. So how likely are they? How risk averse are most local planning authorities?
So I think the clarifications in the NPPF, there's a small window where I think the clarifications will help clever local authorities take a more risky approach. So Elmbridge, I mentioned, they are meeting just over 70% of the standard method. I have read their evidence. It is very clear how they got to that decision. It is probably the first big test case, but you've hot on their heels, you've got Crawley, you've got Oxford City, you've got a number of others that are now being a little bit more proactive and saying, look, we just can't do this, we can't meet our needs. You've also got some like Worthing and places like that have already been through it and demonstrated that they have got no hope. They're sandwiched between the English Channel and the South Downs National Park, and they ended up with I think their target is less than 40% of the standard method. So it absolutely is doable. An inspector can't force you to find something out of nothing, but it does come down to how risk adverse or how confident the council is. It comes down to leadership at the end of the day. And I know that Elmbridge have got a very strong leader.
Yeah, and Rosie, if I might have just one last
I was just
quick
about to
question
say,
to build on that, please.
Yeah.
Is Catriona, do you think there is a way in which a national park, I mean, very keen for us because we're at the western end of the national park and only 40.
Oh,
we've lost Simon.
Simon's currently gone.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I think we picked up some of the points on the national parks in the chat, and it does seem to be one of the issues where, and Caroline might want to come in and say something on this. I suspect Simon will have to rejoin, but it is.
So yeah, I've just seen that. So that's around the exceptional circumstances case around the national parks that Caroline's put on there. It's worth just explaining this a little bit. So it's not very helpful that the government have used the same term as traditionally used for greenbelt. Exceptional circumstances for releasing greenbelt is a well-tested historic process. What the government has said is, so there's two ways in which you can have a lower number potentially than the standard method. One is doing what Elmbridge have done and saying that's our starting point, but once we've applied other national policies like greenbelt, etc., we can't meet that target, so our local plan target will be less than that. Worthing was the same. The other way is by saying that your starting point, so you don't even use the standard methodology as your starting point because the demographic information in it, you have got an exceptional case. Now, it came about, some of you may be from the West Midlands and more familiar with this, but I think it was a CPRE challenge. It came about because Coventry has got it's a small city with a large proportion of students, and the demographics were skewed because of that. And that was the first time that sort of, well, you can't even use the standard methodology because the underlying information is wrong. So so the exceptional circumstances is where you shouldn't even be able to use the standard method as a starting point. And I can see that being around national parks because they are very, very restricted or constrained. So I can see places like New Forest arguing that they have got exceptional circumstances. So the starting point is different. So yeah, I think there's been quite a lot of work done by Liverpool University supporting councils on what the exceptional circumstances are. And it could be also the other ones, so students, places like national parks, but the other one is where you've got a very high proportion of older residents, which I think some councils will argue as well.
Yeah, okay, that's super helpful. Simon, we thought you'd gone, but your voice is there. So
no, thank you very much, Catriona, and thank you, Rosie. I'll shut down now.
Okay, thank you. Good. Right. Marge, have you found
we do have a lady called Kathy who's got a hand up. So shall I take Kathy off mute so that she can raise her question too?
Yeah, and then we better go to the chat because there's a lot in there. So.
And then we picked up some of the issues, and I know you and Caroline have responded to a couple, but Kathy, can you hear us okay? See if Kathy is able to come off mute.
So while you're doing that, it's going to be fascinating watching.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
There we go. Yeah. Hi, Kathy.
Okay, hi. Okay, so what I'd like to say is that what I've argued to my council is talking about sustainability used to be, and now we've got these environmental outcomes, and basic rule of sustainability is aligned growth and infrastructure, which means water infrastructure. Okay, this is why all our rivers are polluted. This is why the environment is dying, why our water table is messed up. And that's because it's down to private companies And any civilized country since the Romans has known that you have proper water infrastructure. And it drives me absolutely mad how they are absolutely crippling even Ramsar sites with trying to build things without realizing water is absolutely fundamental. Okay, that's my point. And I wish people would do that. So all of this sort of like decorative stuff, it for me is nothing. You know, of course we need the housing and etc. But you've got to get your water right, and it is criminal what we're doing to the environment. Okay, thank you.
So Kathy, you've allowed me a route into my pet subject around strategic planning. So one of the casualties, and it's a really big casualty of the 2010-2012 reforms, were when they got rid of regional plans, strategic planning. Now, what we were left with is planning at a very local level and planning at a national level. And a lot of things, so one of the things that we were planning in the South East Plan was around 2 new reservoirs. These are strategic infrastructure that now don't fit at a local level because they're too big, and they're not national infrastructure. So they're lost. There's a lot of things around that and around environmental issues that are with river catchments, for example, that are cross-boundary in nature. They impact on more than one local authority, and there is no system, no part of the planning system to pick these up. My argument would be that is why we are in the mess with nutrient neutrality and everything else, because we are 12, 14 years behind in where we should be in terms of tackling them. As net zero and other issues around climate change, there was I'm very proud to say some really strong policies in the South East Plan around climate change that were way ahead of any local plan you even see now. So yeah, we will get back there, but we've lost decades in the meantime to address the sort of things you've been talking about.
Can I say one more thing very quickly?
Yep, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so actually we have the water directive, the water framework, and we're supposed to have river basin policies. That was part of EU legislation. We're signed up to that still, and it's been transferred to British law. And so that it's there, but we're just not using it. They pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah,
Okay,
and that was something that the regional strategies and the sub-regional strategies absolutely picked up.
Yeah, but it's right there now. I mean, it was in the previous NPPF.
But there's nobody. There's no local authority in the planning side to take that and run with it. There's no accountability.
They don't want to.
For
They
that.
don't want to. They don't want to. But it's there in law, and nobody's challenging it, and they just don't know. I'm sorry to keep on talking. I'm sorry. I'll shut myself up.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you.
I think the environment is one of the key issues for many of the groups in one way or another, whether it's the grade 1, 2 and 3 agricultural land, whether it's the water that we've just been talking about. What Jackie Copley has just put in the chat is that if planning teams are better resourced, then enforcement would be better. And I do think this is an issue because at the moment it is very much left to local communities to pick up things that are not delivered, that have been promised. And so I think there is an issue around that whole enforcement debate. But there are a lot of points in the chat about various issues related to the environment, and the protections just aren't strong enough in the we do a lot of talking about it, but the protections just aren't strong enough in the regulations at the moment.
Well,
Yeah.
I think my argument would be that the reactive enforcement side of things would be needed an awful lot less if we got the upfront planning bit right.
Agree.
True.
Totally.
Yeah. I was having that same discussion earlier, actually, locally as well. There's a question here about solar farms and batteries, BESS. Do you know, there's lots of talk about permits for battery storage sites, but we have seen no detail. Who owns the implementation and how can we influence it?
This is something that keeps coming up, and it's a little bit like water reservoirs, that nobody seems to want to own any of this at the moment unless it's very, very local. So I don't have an answer to that, really, I'm afraid.
Okay, that's fair enough. one for us all to try and find out. And I think we've done those. Simon, Caroline. I've answered the footnote question. So we've got a question about how do we protect grade 1, 2 and 3 agricultural land for food protection. So I have put the footnote in there, which slightly strengthens things. Do you think the new NPPF protects farmland a bit more, or do you think other factors always dominate?
In theory it does, but I think my big concern is, again, back to if every local planning authority is effectively fending for itself and they're having to deal with very high targets. I always say you end up with development in the least worst place rather than the best place, and sometimes the least worst place is on agricultural land. You know, and therefore you don't even get to the debate about why it's important to protect agricultural land in terms of food supply, you know, all of these really important issues, because you've got less, you've not got that, and you know, strategic planning provides you with a much bigger spatial canvas to allow you to avoid all of these different things and ensure development goes to the best place and not the least worst place. So I think the loss of especially grade 1, 2, 3, but the high quality stuff especially, I think is a direct of that whole process. And not having choices, not having enough choice of where to put development.
No, I agree. So you mean basically, let's say a council claims it has no brownfield, maybe it's got greenbelt and national park, and then all it has left is top quality farmland. That's the kind of ugly sister in the NPPF. So by default, it hasn't have any protections really, does it? It's kind of nice not to build on it, but if it's all you've got, then it will get built on, won't it?
But you've also got the other side of it where the farmer's saying, I can't make my farm viable anymore. So, you know, you've got the economics around this as well. I heard a brilliant interview at the Restless Politics, the leading interviews, where the Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart interview on a one-off basis, and they interviewed I can't remember what's her name, the chair of the NFU, and that was a really, really good interview, I thought, and it sort of put
Minute Batters,
probably. Yeah, that's her. And it was a great interview because it sort of captured all the real challenges that the farming community are facing.
Yeah, no. Okay.
And this is just the planning bits got caught up in all of that.
Yeah, no, she's been very good at banging that drum, hasn't she, Minette Batters? There's a new president now, Tom Bradshaw, happens to be local here.
Oh, that's right.
So one of the Planning Inspectorate, do you have any sense at all, or have you heard how they think they might cope with the huge influx of plans, given that there's this tight new deadline and everyone will be submitting all at once? Do you think they'll be resourceful enough to take it?
Okay. They're not resourcing out to do it with it. Mind you, a lot of them have been sitting twiddling their thumbs. It's not just them all submitting their plans. The big concern is not all of them submitting their plans at the same time. The big concern is that a lot of these plans won't be ready for submission and they'll be submitted anyway. And therefore you end up consuming weeks, months, years even trying to fix a plan that shouldn't have been submitted. And that's the real danger I think they've got with a hard deadline like that. You're just going to end up with a whole load of poor quality plans that inspectors are going to have to spend. So it's not going to be, you know, get them out the door as quick as possible. Inspectors are going to be tied up for months trying to fix poor quality plans.
Yeah, okay. Well, we can watch that one with interest, can't we, and see how whichever government we have reacts to it. Right, we might have, I think this is a question. Then we've got from Simon, Commissioner sounds like a real threat, which I agree. We need land management plans to stop the siloed competition with this precious land. Have you heard anything from DEFRA about the land use framework? It was all go last year, wasn't it? But
it's all gone very quiet. And I spoke to somebody recently about it, and they said if it comes out, it won't be anything that they promised.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Well,
and it will be. I think the message was it will be purely what DEFRA controls, because the idea behind it was that it would stray onto the wider sort of land use issues. But now it's saying, I think DEFRA had their knuckles slapped and said, right, if you're going to do it, it's got to be things you can control and not anyone else. Don't stray onto any other departments, which is a absolute classic problem in that all the government departments work in silos.
Yeah, no, I had
And
that
a
very, I had
national
that-
spatial plan is needed.
Definitely, no, I completely agree. I had that very chat with DEFRA when they were enthusiastically talking about it, and they were trying to define at official level what it would look like, and they agreed you have to sort of bring in all the different departments from energy to housing to DEFRA, the whole lot. But I assumed it probably would get watered down, and I assume we'll hear nothing till after an election, because it's going to be pretty
Yeah.
sort of challenging, whatever they say. It's going to upset somebody somewhere, isn't it? So no probably major benefit to them from publishing it now. I mean, we've talked a bit about this. Should affordability be better defined by local incomes rather than sort of discount and house prices and rent and so on? Do you think there's ever any hope that government will recognise that's a better way of doing things? Any government?
It's a big issue, and it's a complex issue, a very complex issue. I think one thing there is the recent report by Janice Morfitt and Ben Clifford, which from UCL, which basically looked at what local authorities are doing themselves to address waiting lists, homelessness, and it was about the economic value of looking at different ways, investing in their own properties and all sorts of things like that. And I think over 90% of councils are doing something now. Very little of that has been done through the planning system. Very little of it's been done through Section 106 agreements, developer contributions, because anything provided through that route doesn't meet their needs. It doesn't deal with the real issue, which is the homelessness. It's the people that are desperately in need. And, you know, my view is, from a TCP vice chair, I will absolutely campaign on their behalf, is around council house programmes, you know, or genuine social house programmes. I think we have to lift it out of planning and stop expecting the planning system to do all the heavy lifting, because it was never set up to do that. And it's a nice easy excuse for government to say, well, the more land you provide, the more affordable housing you deliver. It's the rhetoric again. It doesn't solve the problem.
Okay, oh, that's very interesting actually. So stop pretending the planning system would ever do it and think of ways of making it happen. And actually there do seem to be, like you highlighted, but there seem to be a lot of reports suddenly which more bodies and organisations are sort of recognising that actually it brings huge benefits, then we need to sort it out, and that we're not. So that is good to see.
There's two I quoted there, Joseph Rowntree and the Octopus one are well worth the read, both from how complex it all is, and the fact that we need to sort of start looking for different solutions and not focus on the planning system. Yeah,
okay, good. We'll do that. And I'll circulate your slides. I think you mentioned that earlier, so people can see those in it. So thank you. Right, we're coming up towards 6 o'clock, and we've got one here: implications of LURA for neighbourhood plans which contain development management policies. Will neighbourhood plans be restricted to the creation of design codes and denied the opportunity to set out what types of development should be located in what locations? Do you have any?
Oh, I don't know. I'm assuming neighbourhood plans will have to reflect the local plan design code work. And some local plans will do them at a neighbourhood level. So whether if there's a neighbourhood plan being prepared for that area, so the whole point of design codes is that it is a much more interactive and engaging process. So if there is a neighbourhood plan, you would like to think the local planning authority will use neighbourhood plan and the people involved in that, the neighbourhood, to develop design codes that are what that neighbourhood wants. You'd like to think that's the case.
Yeah, you would, wouldn't you? Well, let's hope. There's another one about design codes. Do you think that climate change type issues could fit in with design codes?
So I have the absolute pleasure of working with Andy Van Bransky at Spelthorne. We're both sort of advisors to the council, and Andy was brought in to do the sort of design codes. Now, for those who don't know Andy, he was the author. He is the master behind design codes. He's a very, very experienced architect who was the government's architect and wrote the National Design Code and everything else. He is absolutely 100%. His view is that a design code that doesn't address climate change is not a design code, is his view. It has to look at sustainability issues. It has to look at flood risk. It has to look at sustainable transport and climate change, net zero. It should absolutely run through design code. Any design code work is his view.
Okay, well, that's brilliant. So that's actually something we as community groups can keep saying nicely to our local authorities, can't we, as we go through the process?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, one here about the East-West Rail, which is entirely dependent on house building, and most will have to be on Greenbelt. So if only local authorities can authorise exceptional circumstances to build on Greenbelt, is the only way that central government could impose this house building, would it be via a development corporation for the East-West Rail, do you think?
It will be through the national planning process. So it's slightly different. So it's a similar process to justifying very special circumstances in terms of a development, an application. So it will be a similar process to that. So it won't be done unless there's a local plan that's can take the land out of the Greenbelt. It will be done through the national planning process, infrastructure planning process, which will effectively do the same job.
Oh, what, as an NSIP kind of thing?
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
and also if you've got the government may decide development corporation for that whole length is the way they want to go, but my understanding from that area is they've pulled right back from that, so it's very much in the gift of the local authorities in terms of what they're going to do. And other than Cambridge, where the government has said it's going to do lots, not a lot's happening along that route, from my understanding.
No,
so it's going to be very interesting, because when the government pulled back from the Oxford-Cambridge ARC framework, whatever you think about it, one of the things that was going to do was join the dots up on all of this. It was national infrastructure, it was development, but it was supposed to be looking at it from a sort of placemaking perspective. It wasn't just about a bit of kit or about a whole load of houses. Now it's much more fragmented, and that's my worry about East-West Rail, is that it's still going to probably go ahead, but it's very fragmented in the way it will be done in terms of how it fits with the wider sort of planning and placemaking role around East-West Rail.
Okay. In an ideal world, if I had more time, I would release Nick to speak to you, because I'm sure he's got lots to say about this. But I'm sorry, Nick, you'll have to remain silent, because let's have a look. I think we're nearly there, actually. Climate, national parks we've done. As we move toward should we be doing more for irreplaceable food production? I mean, you've kind of talked about that, haven't you, in terms of sort of if there's strategic planning, we could do that better. And you have agreed that we do need to, if planning teams are better resourced, enforcement would be. So I think we're kind of there, actually. Gove's comment about placing, right, again, I think you've answered this one, was Michael Gove's comment about placing the local community at the heart of planning, just pre-election posturing. How does it work in practice, and will it involve local communities? I mean, you've said bits and pieces about that. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I get it's a bit of speculation, but if there is a Labour government, I fully expect them to prioritise what changes they want to make, because they'll want to hit the ground running. And if this new system is getting put in place, I'm not sure they'll be willing to throw it up in the air, and therefore that whole new system that is supposed to be about vision-led plans with much more engagement would come forward. So it's not just posturing. I think there is a real chance that could be the local plan system we end up with, even under a Labour government, at least until they make changes further down the line.
Yeah, okay. So quick fire ones now. Do you think the affordability factor will ever be removed from the standard formula? The illogical affordability factor?
Well, they've got nothing to offer, have they? There's nothing else to offer at the moment. And every time they get asked to review it, they come back and they say, oh, no, we're not going to bother. So whilst we've still got, and it'll be interesting whether Labour stick with it. Labour have said they will review it, but not straight away. They want to come down hard on targets. That'll be interesting. I've had lots of conversation with them around that. It's bonkers, isn't it? It never had any evidence to support it, and even as I said, every report that comes out says you can't deal with affordability by expecting house builders who are businesses to build lots of housing and reduce their profit. It doesn't work that way. It's totally contrary to how the market works.
No, I agree exactly. It's a nonsense really. Right, and I think we really over our time. If you're happy to take one more, this is on case law indicating that local plans can be declared out of date if the external environment has changed materially and politically. Given everything that's happened, not only in planning but over the world in the last few years, geopolitically, economically, pandemic and stuff, is there enough substance to request a local authority reviews its local plan now, to ensure that applications are not incorrectly approved? I think the basis being the local plan is so out of date given that everything's happened. So what do you think about that?
So, well, it depends. If it's a local plan that's less than 5 years old, you've got no chance of getting a local council to review it. If it's more than 5 years old, they are now legally required to review it, or at least assess whether it needs to be reviewed. And that could be external factors. It could be that the housing target's well out of date or whatever. But we're back to your St Albans issue and other things like that. You know, there's so much posturing that prevent councils from taking forward local plans, and that, you know, and I would argue there's still an awful lack of experience in a lot of councils that really understand the things that impact on placemaking, these wider things like global economics, technological change, climate change, all these things. There's a real lack of experience, I think, or expertise in local councils to address some of these things.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think they're also very pressured to find sites for housing, aren't they? And that's sort of a driving factor for a lot of them. And some of the rest of it comes as a sort of secondary, doesn't it? It's kind of, they have to meet their numbers, they have to find their sites, and that
absolutely. You know, climate change is supposed to be the absolute heart and the golden thread that runs through local plans. I've yet to find many that you can genuinely say that is the case.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, well, look, that was incredibly interesting, and thank you. And thank you for all your questions from the audience as well, which were really good. So I think what I've taken from that is we all need to go out and we need to influence our local councils anytime they start reviewing their plans or putting a new plan in place. And we need to make sure that climate change is at the heart of it, and that proper genuine affordability is somehow being addressed, and all the things that I see you all talking about on Facebook and Twitter in the audience. We just need to keep influencing to try and see some better plans. So I think that was very motivational. Thank you, Catriona, and appreciate your time, and thank you, audience, as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.